Family members in Wuhan trying to honor those lost to the virus say they are afraid to bury the ashes as they aren't those of loved ones. The Chinese regime is now calling for cooperation with the U.S. over the virus. A Chinese defector says that's a common diplomatic tactic by the regime. Many Chinese businesses protesting and demanding help from the regime for economic losses suffered during the outbreak. An expert says video conferencing software Zoom is susceptible to Chinese regime's infiltration and can be used as a tool for gathering business intelligence. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is now in intensive care. His condition worsened after testing positive 11 days ago. In the U.S., states are gearing up to tackle a critical next 2 weeks in the fight against the CCP virus. This as the U.S. death toll surpasses 10,000. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. All of China went silent for 3 minutes on April 4th, remembering those who perished. Many family members in Wuhan wanted to honor those lost to the virus. But family members are disclosing that the cremated remains they received from the funeral homes were not those of family members. They dare not bury the ashes. We previously reported on a Chinese netizen saying the ashes of many dead people are mixed together and divided into many portions. Each family just gets a random portion. One family went to get their mother's ashes, but the cremated remains included a man's belt buckle. Another said his father never needed dentures, but among the ashes was a porcelain tooth. One netizen wrote, the Chinese Communist Party deceived family members who were lining up to collect the ashes of their loved ones. And this once again shows the evil nature of the party that has always been lying and using violence. Chinese people will continue to realize it. Even as officials insist the epidemic is under control, panic buying is on the rise in China. Problem is, China imports a lot of its grain. Because of the global pandemic, many countries have restricted exports, including rice and oil. Hubei province, Chongqing, Shandong, Gansu, and even in China's capital Beijing have all witnessed panic buying. Stores show empty shelves. After 76 days under lockdown, Hubei province is set to lift its lockdown on April 8th. So that people can go back to work, Hubei authorities continue downplaying the numbers. In the first 5 days of April, only one confirmed case was reported for the whole province. Residents say the reality is different. On April 2nd, Mr. Zhang from Wuhan told our sister media, the Epoch Times, that someone died at home the previous day from the virus. He added, lifting the lockdown on the 8th is risky because the outbreak there isn't under control. Authorities in Wuhan are calling for volunteers to help make disease control a norm for everyday life. Volunteers would advise citizens to wear masks and ask them not to gather together. Anyone leaving the city would need to show a health code that gives their health status. According to health officials in a northeastern province, Heilongjiang, on April 2nd, there were no new confirmed cases, no suspected cases, and only one new asymptomatic case, which was imported from abroad. But strangely, Jiamusi, a city in Heilongjiang province, was put on lockdown again on April 2nd due to the CCP virus, and an internal announcement went out that exact date, saying that certain cases are growing exponentially. Authorities are now asked to manage the outbreak again as before. All residential blocks be closed off again and only residents should be allowed to enter. Mr. Li from Jiamusi told us there has been a constant stream of confirmed cases in the city, but authorities don't allow the hospitals to report them. He said the standard statement now is that there are only cases from outside or asymptomatic cases. In a surprise move, Iran's health ministry spokesman criticized China for the virus outbreak, saying the stats China presented are a, quote, bitter joke. He said many around the world thought the new virus was similar to influenza and would have a low death rate. He said while the situation in Iran and Japan weren't on the scale of an epidemic, it was in China. He noted Wuhan in particular had experienced an epidemic. As a doctor himself, he questioned how China could contain an epidemic within 2 months. He wrote on Twitter that scientific issues cannot and should not be mixed with politics. His comments came under fire from China. China's ambassador to Iran advised him to carefully read the Chinese Health Ministry's daily press conference before coming to any conclusions. After months of bashing the U.S., the Chinese regime is now calling for cooperation. A Chinese defector and former diplomat talked with NTD about the Chinese regime's two-faced diplomacy.
New York is my favorite American city. This is the first line by Chinese Ambassador Cui Tiankai in his op-ed in the New York Times published on Sunday. In contrast to aggressive accusations made earlier by Chinese officials, Cui called for China and the U.S. to cooperate against the virus. China has recently donated 1,000 ventilators to New York. 100 Chinese scholars wrote an open letter last week asking for U.S.-China to work together, saying politicized criticisms help no one. These messages of solidarity seem to contradict the regime's earlier statements. But Chen Yonglin, a Chinese defector and former Chinese diplomat, told us that this is a common tactic of the Communist Party. Chen says the Communist Party send out friendly messages not because they have changed or realized their mistakes, but to avoid retaliation for their earlier provocation.
We call it grasp with both hands. Before, when I worked for the Department of Foreign Ministry, we always used the two-handed way to deal with the U.S. Deng Xiaoping said one needs to pretend to be weak. You need to battle with the enemy, but also call for cooperation. You need to take advantage of the conflict and constantly adjust your strategy according to the situation.
The regime had propped up propaganda claiming the virus was brought to China by the U.S. military. The statement caused huge backlash from the West. President Trump used the phrase Chinese virus several times to stress the origin of the pandemic.
Sometimes the CCP feel like the situation has turned against them, so they'll then turn around and appear friendly again. They understand that right now Western countries are severely lacking in masks. If they can make these countries depend on China, this will be a chance for the regime to flip an unfavorable situation and expand their influence.
This call for cooperation has also reached experts in the U.S. Last week, nearly 100 U.S. experts, including former Obama and Bush officials, wrote an open letter calling on Trump to focus on finding the resolve to work together with China. Meanwhile, the Chinese regime has not stopped their domestic propaganda. Major Chinese news outlet Sohu posted an article on Monday claiming, although there is currently no evidence that the U.S. created and released the virus, it is only normal for people to have such suspicion. For 2 months since the outbreak started, the Chinese regime had repeatedly refused the CDC's offer to send American experts to help observe the outbreak. Last month, the Chinese regime expelled American journalists from 3 major outlets, an expert calling it one notch between closing down an embassy. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Many small businesses at the virus epicenter have suffered during the outbreak. They are now protesting and demanding the government's help. NTD Xi Wenrong has more.
Since March, the Chinese regime has covered up the epidemic to demand that production continue. Their voices have been distorted to protect their identities.
I heard from my relatives in Wuhan last night there are still virus cases in Wuhan, but the data will not be reported or even secretly quarantined.
On April 8th, Wuhan will lift its lockdown and various industries will resume production. Mr. Li, an owner of a barbecue restaurant, has 15 stores there. So far, he's lost almost 10 million yuan.
Workers are being paid and subsidized, but we've had no income for the past few months. The store also has to pay rent, including for some dormitories. The employees have to live and we have to take care of them. So far, the business has lost almost 10 million yuan.
Mr. Li said restaurant owners in Wuhan were petitioning the regime to get help for small and medium-sized catering businesses. 150 restaurant owners signed, but they've had no reply. One restaurant owner says if she doesn't get help with rent and salaries, her business might go bankrupt.
Even if we start working again, we can't afford all this. We can only rely on the regime.
According to Taiwanese news media, in the first quarter of this year, more than 460,000 companies in mainland China went bankrupt because of the CCP virus outbreak. Videos circulating online show business owners protesting in different parts of China, asking the regime for help.
Many wholesalers said there's no customer to buy, no consumption, no one is buying clothes.
Qingdong owns a clothing factory in Hunan province. He said on March 31st, 8,000 or 9,000 people appealed to the regime at Zhuzhou City Hall. He said there were dozens of policemen at the scene. The authorities arrested more than a dozen business owners, who were released that same evening. Qingdong added, police arrested people mainly to intimidate them and expel them from the area. But the next day, on April 1st, many market owners continued expressing their demands. Reporting by Shu Wenrong, NTD News.
Qi Zhihua is a Chinese business owner at great risk to himself and his family. He has talked to us to warn the world about the Chinese Communist Party.
远离中共，远离邪恶，你会平安。
Xi was visiting family in Australia when the outbreak began. One of his friends works in a Chinese prison and told him the death toll was underreported by 15 times.
应该是200多人，实际不对，实际应该是3000多人，应该是3000多人。市里也不让报，省里也不让报了，都不能报。
In March, Wuhan residents claimed that patients were sent for cremation before they had even died. Xi also brought this up.
太残忍，你想象不到这个中共他有多残忍。
Xi says he's always been aware of the CCP's threat. His relatives starved to death during the Great Chinese Famine in the 1960s. His friends' parents jailed because they're Christians.
意大利、伊朗，包括英国、德国、美国，还有华尔街一部分，是不是？他们有些都疫情是比较严重。你跟共产党走得太近，你跟杀人犯走得太近。
He says the world should hold the communist regime responsible and prosecute it in international court.
In France, a senator wants to allow Taiwan to join the UN's World Health Organization. He says the CCP's influence over the agency facilitated the global outbreak. Our France correspondent David Vives has the details.
With only 5 dead and under 400 infected, Taiwan and its 23 million people remain relatively safe from the virus. The country put protective measures in place, not including confinement, back in December. French Senator André Gattolin says Taiwan's example should be followed. On December 31st last year, Taiwan warned the World Health Organization that there was human-to-human transmission of the virus, despite China saying otherwise. But according to Gattolin, the WHO chose not to listen to Taiwan.
WHO didn't take in consideration the threat of human-to-human transmission, so many governments lost precious time.
Despite the agency having no mandatory enforcement power over countries, many governments abide by its policies. As the virus began to spread from China, the WHO took until January 27th to call it a risk on the global level. In several public hearings, the agency often praised the Chinese Communist Party for its so-called quick answers. But Francis Gattolin said the World Health Organization's policies should be called into question.
It seems to me that WHO is under the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. We know that China is a major player in WHO due to the money they invested.
Taiwan was excluded from the WHO in 2016, the same time a new president who opposed the Chinese regime was elected.
We need to address WHO governance issues, and we need an independent investigation to understand how the virus came out of China.
Senator Gattolin hopes the WHO will examine Taiwan's call for membership at the next World Health Assembly, which takes place on May 17th to 21st. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
A new report about a popular video conferencing software is sending sensitive meeting information to servers in Beijing. An expert says this poses a security risk. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
Video conferencing software Zoom has seen a surge in usage during the outbreak, growing about 20 times to over 200 million daily users. Schools, big corporations, and even high-level politicians use the service. But a new report shows that Zoom sends secret encryption keys to servers in Beijing. This poses a significant security risk.
Its transmission to the server in Beijing essentially means it is within the CCP's reach, so it can be intercepted. That is to say, the CCP has the technology to intercept data and information from it.
Tong said the security flaw could enable the Chinese Communist Party to easily collect business intelligence. The regime can learn about the high-level operations in big corporations and their strategic decisions. It can then be a step ahead of the competition. The research also found that most of Zoom's research and development staff are in China. Tong says this makes the company susceptible to infiltration by the CCP.
Even if the company itself is good, it may be innocent, but once it's established in China, it will have a presence there. Then, particularly if it has commercial or technological capabilities that the CCP needs, the CCP will certainly not let it go.
Tong says having a company in China means you have to play by the party's rules, and the regime has many ways to infiltrate.
One of the most common means is sending government-controlled persons to work in the company. Buying them out also happens.
The Chinese regime can also threaten the company's bottom line. If the company doesn't obey the party, authorities could make things difficult for them. Zoom's founder, Eric Yuan, is originally from China, and Tong says national ties also makes him vulnerable to pressure from the Chinese regime. The New York Department of Education and Elon Musk's SpaceX have banned Zoom over privacy concerns. Juliet Song, NTD News, New York.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was moved into an intensive care unit tonight after his condition worsened. The 55-year-old Prime Minister was admitted to hospital on Sunday night as a precaution after his virus symptoms persisted. Government officials said Johnson asked the UK's foreign minister to deputize for him when necessary. A spokesperson added he is receiving excellent care. In a tweet this morning before his condition deteriorated, the Prime Minister said he was in good spirits. Johnson has been in self-isolation in his flat on Downing Street after testing positive 11 days ago. Politicians from across the spectrum have expressed their support for the UK Prime Minister. U.S. deaths from the CCP virus surpassed 10,000. White House officials say the next 2 weeks will be important in stopping the spread of the virus. One official compared the next week to Pearl Harbor and 9/11.
Weeks into the U.S. battle against the coronavirus, healthcare providers in the nation's hotspots are bracing for what may be the most difficult stretch of all.
We are very, very worried about, in particular, our intensive care capacity.
The Trump administration forecasts a peak in U.S. cases in the next 2 weeks as states try to keep up. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer said key facilities in her state have just days' worth of personal protective equipment, or PPE, for healthcare workers.
We are doing everything that we can at the state level to secure more personal protection equipment.
Modeling suggests Louisiana could be reaching a peak in cases, but other states saw weekend upticks like California.
It really is a race against time to have the equipment and the supplies that we need as the number of people in our hospitals continues to grow.
New Jersey and Pennsylvania also saw cases rise in recent days.
And in New York, the virus may have reached its peak. Governor Cuomo says the number of deaths in the state have been effectively flat for 2 days, and hospitalizations are down. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more.
New hospitalizations are down in New York, and Governor Cuomo said this could mean the virus has reached its peak.
Total number of hospitalizations are down. The ICU admissions are down, and the daily intubations are down. Those are all good signs, and again would suggest a possible flattening of the curve.
On top of that, Cuomo said COVID deaths have been flat for 2 days, but despite the optimism, he extended the statewide shutdown again to be on the safe side.
We still have to extend New York pause, because if that curve is turning, it's turning because the rate of infection is going down. One of the reasons the rate of infection is going down is because social distancing is working.
Governor Cuomo said President Trump's been helpful to the state, and he'll ask the president to let COVID patients onto a military ship he sent over. As for ventilators, the governor said the state has enough for now.
We don't need any additional ventilators right now, and we have California has released ventilators. State of Washington has released ventilators. We got 1,000 ventilators from China. So right now, we're okay.
Cuomo added that hospitals may say they're running low on medical supplies, but they have everything they need so far. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
And responding to the rumor that the city would start using parks as burial sites, the governor's press secretary said they are not considering it, but they are eyeing Hart Island for temporary burials. And earlier today, members of the coronavirus task force gave the nation its daily update on the virus.
And I was informed that Governor Cuomo has already told you and announced, he called me up a little while ago and he asked whether or not it would be possible to use the ship with respect to fighting the virus. And we hadn't had that in mind at all, but we're going to let him do it, and we're also going to let New Jersey.
President Trump announced he would send 3,000 public health personnel to New York. He also said the military will build several other field hospitals nationwide. The president thanked companies like 3M and Apple for producing medical supplies for healthcare workers. Trump also mentioned that he asked 2 leading U.S. therapeutics companies to contact London in an effort to help Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Top White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow says he would award the Trump administration's relief program an A. His comments come amid a slowdown in getting money out to Americans who have been financially affected by the pandemic.
Standing on the White House drive on Monday, Director of the National Economic Council, Larry Kudlow, said the country is doing okay.
I think we're doing okay, frankly. I know there are always a few glitches, but I'd give it an A.
He's referring to the White House's massive $2.2 trillion stimulus package, the largest of its kind in American history. But small businesses in need faced a bumpy start Friday. Few were able to apply, while some big banks said they weren't ready for applications. Millions of businesses were expected to apply for the rescue loans. The aid would come from the $349 billion Paycheck Protection Program put in place to help them retain workers and pay bills. Kudlow acknowledged the bumpy start, saying they know some lousy numbers would be coming up.
Well, it's a massive package, and give it a few weeks minimum, a month, and let's see how effective we are. Let's see how efficient we are. And let's see if we need more money, we'll go and seek more money.
He added that the goal is to keep people going until the virus situation improves.
I still believe, given our assistance package and hope and maybe prayer that we're in a 4 to 8 week period, we can get a pretty good snapback.
His comments come as stocks around the world jumped on Monday after some of the hardest hit areas offered sparks of hope that the worst of the outbreak may be on the horizon.
New York is working with manufacturing companies to produce more protective equipment for healthcare workers. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio visited the Brooklyn Navy Yard on Monday, where workers are making surgical gowns to keep up with the high demand.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio visited the Brooklyn Navy Yard on Monday, where workers are making surgical gowns to keep up with the high demand. New York officials say public hospitals in the city have at least a week's worth of gowns, and private hospitals and nursing homes are running even lower. De Blasio's office says the factories plan to produce more than 300,000 gowns by the end of April.
At the same time, American Airlines is slashing travel to the city. USA Today says the carrier is only operating 13 daily flights into New York metro area airports, compared to 271 last year. The airline says the demand for flights is disappearing. The announcement comes one day after United cut flights to New York. Other airlines, including JetBlue and Spirit, had already suspended their service. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the EU is facing its biggest test yet since it began. And in Spain, 2 million stolen masks have been found.
German Chancellor Merkel says the EU is facing its biggest test since its founding. She said it was important that the bloc emerges strong from the economic crisis unleashed by the virus. In Asia, Japan is preparing to declare a state of emergency on Tuesday. It will affect Tokyo and 6 other prefectures and is set to last for about a month. The declaration will give governors authority to call on people to stay at home and ask businesses to close. Elsewhere, police found 2 million stolen masks in a city in northern Spain. The stolen material, which included other medical supplies, was estimated to be worth over $5.3 million. Some of it had been sold to the country's neighbor, Portugal. But a spark of hope has emerged in Greece. 7-year-old pianist Stelios Karasidis composed an isolation waltz for a world under lockdown.
I am dedicating to you a piece of my own.
The child prodigy has written piano concertos and played in concert halls around the world, including New York's Carnegie Hall.
A criminal investigation is underway in Australia to find out how thousands of people were allowed off a cruise ship last month, despite many showing flu-like symptoms.
Thousands of passengers were permitted to get off this cruise ship in Sydney last month, despite many experiencing flu-like symptoms. Now, an Australian state's launching a criminal investigation into how that was allowed to happen. Nearly a third of Australia's deaths have been attributed to Carnival's ship Ruby Princess. On March 19th, the liner was allowed to disembark passengers at Sydney's Circular Quay. Many later tested positive for COVID-19. New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller.
There is clear evidence that Corona-19 has been brought off that ship. There's clear evidence now that when it stopped in New Zealand that Corona-19 has come off that ship.
The ship's currently stationed off Sydney's coastline, where crew members have been tested for the virus. Australia has 5,687 confirmed cases as of Sunday afternoon, with the death toll rising to 34.
One German woman started collecting toilet paper long before it became fashionable. And now she's featuring her pride and joy online.
As people fear global shortages, everyday products like toilet paper are in high demand. Collector and author Julie Gudehuus is very interested in toilet paper, but not because she's afraid of running out of it.
And I really have so much to say about it, and so I am happy that the interest is there. Otherwise, I think it is about the fact that people just want it, but I don't really have anything to do with that aspect. I can't contribute to that discussion.
Julie is the owner of a toilet paper collection that stretches all the way back to the late 80s. She currently has 800 rolls and is sharing her passion online.
I like it that there is interest in my YouTube videos. I had a feeling, and that's when I thought, super spontaneously, I'm going to open it up and show it.
The collection, rigorously filed and labeled in a selection of folders, has taught Gudehuus a lot about culture and society.
It opens up thought processes on what motivates people to buy certain loo roll. I would say that the most important factors are price and comfort. What does it feel like?
While the collection is now making a splash, the rest of us have realized you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Here at China in Focus, we bring you first-hand information from inside China. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates.